Bethany. I
Hi,
know. Hi, it's good to
how's it
see
going?
you. Good.
Oh gosh, you're seeing my closet. Hold on, let me shut my door.
When I close your door, we can see your closet.
How messy it is.
I know.
Door closed, but still messy.
That's better.
Looks like Counselor Edwards has her hand up as an attendee.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I couldn't get the two-step verification to work on my cell phone. So we're just going to go ahead and start this working session. And then I understand we got some edits from Lisa Graff, and I don't know if legal department has given us anything additional on a red line, but we're going to work with what we got. I think we actually agree more than we disagree, and I think we're going to do some good stuff today. So good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Thursday, July 22nd, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual working session on docket 0396, an ordinance amending City of Boston Code Ordinances, Chapter 6, Section 610, Language and Communications Access for City Services. This matter was sponsored by Councilor Julia Mejia and was referred to the committee on March 3rd, 2021. This matter is a refile from last year. The committee held a hearing on this matter on October 27th of 2020 and a working session on April 28th of 2021. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct meetings in a public place that is physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this working session via Zoom. The public may watch this working session via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It would also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. This proposal would amend the current language communications ordinance, Chapter 6, Section 610, by expanding upon the original objectives of the ordinance and making city programs, benefits, and services more accessible by offering translation or interpretation services for residents who may have a disability, are English language learners, or limited English speakers. The City Council and Mayor Walsh approved the current ordinance in 2016. Councilor Michelle Wu and former Councilor Tim McCarthy sponsored the proposal in 2016 that ultimately became the current law. At the working session, the committee reviewed the following components of the proposal: adult illiteracy, vital documents, text-to-speech, audio recordings, the timeline of translation, and reporting requirements. The committee discussed defining vital documents, defining financial constraints, and establishing a task force and making the adult illiteracy component as a separate ordinance. The administration made the following suggestions at the working session: conducting additional research to determine need and suggested working with the Office of Workforce Development to partner with organizations that have experience with illiteracy, working with the Office of Workforce Development for text-to-speech and audio recordings, putting the Babel language provisions, if funding is not available, back into the docket, using best efforts language for translation timeline because of concern with the availability of translators. The administration expressed concern with the city's ability to track all of the information. The administration suggested using the information that the office already collects and have that information in a centralized dashboard in one location. Based upon information at that working session, suggested language changes have been made to the ordinance, which the committee will review at this working session. Participating today on the, as one of my colleagues, I have Councilor, of course, the lead sponsor, Councilor Julia Mejia. I see Councilor Liz Braden, Councilor Kenzie Bach, and am I missing? Sure. No, right now we are not. And then on behalf of the administration, we have Chief Selena Barrios Milner from the Equity Cabinet, Jennifer Beaver Wong, Interim Director of Office of Language and Communication Access. The community will also be joined by Lisa Jean Graff, a community advocate, Pastor Dufault J. Saint. My apologies, Pastor. I think I have Pastor Kiki, or Kiki, as also part of the community of the panel, Chair of the Board of Directors for Haitian Americans United, and Bethany Lee, Asian Outreach Unit for the Greater Boston Legal Services. So I'm hoping everyone has the latest information or latest draft in front of them. And I have a list of suggestions that I think we've worked through. I'm going to go through them. I'm going to go through some of the administration's points of contention. And then I would like the administration to walk us through. Or Councilor Mejia, did you want to walk us through the red lines that you agreed to, or did you want the administration to go ahead and do that?
So there are 114, I believe, notes that we received from the legal department. Is that what you want me to go through, or just kind of high level some of the three points that were brought to our attention?
It's up to you, Councilor Mejia. I was just suggesting I have a list of some things right here. And then I was gonna have the administration kind of walk through what they agreed to. And I didn't know if you wanted to or not. That's all.
No, that's fine.
Perfect. Okay. And then we will have, I know Lisa has some suggested language as well. All right. So just so we can efficiently go through it. So just as some points to note, the summary of it, the Language Access Ordinance codifies the establishment of the city's Office of Language and Communications Access. It oversees increased access to local government for ESL, limited proficiency speakers, for those who only speak languages other than English, and for people with disabilities. The OLCA, or the Office, I'm going to call it by that, the Office of Language and Communication Access, so the OLCA, will coordinate with each city department's liaison to develop, improve, and implement a comprehensive departmental plan. The OLCA will also be responsible for supporting city departments in handling interpretation and translation requests received by the city. OLCA with ensuring that translation and interpretation services are present at community meetings, depending on the demographic makeup of the neighborhood. The OLCA will create employee development, training strategy, and quality control protocols to be provided to all department heads. The ordinance also mandates that city departments translate all vital documents that are public-facing into all of Boston's most commonly used languages. The ordinance also requires that city departments work to provide vital documents, their online web pages, and other information spoken aloud in all of Boston's languages that are spoken by, at this time, it says more than 1,000 people. I think that was might be an edit that we went through. The summary of the ordinance charges each city department annually, reviewing its performance and frequency of service delivery to people who speak languages other than English and residents with disabilities, and making said data publicly available in language accessible online dashboards. The OLCA will also hold a listening forum at least once a year to seek feedback from the community on language and communications access issues in the city. So there are some points of words and points of contention that we'll walk through and may have been resolved. The change the timeline from the administration perspective, the implementation timeline, moving it from 6 months to 12 months. Ensure that the timeline for document translation follows best efforts language to be used because of concern with availability of translators. And make changes to the Babel notification from a hard date to a rough estimation, less committal, but still wanting to get it done. I believe Pastor Kike will be here to reflect on the importance of this ordinance. And we will grant him a little bit of time actually I think he was requested he do a little bit of, I don't know if the pastor is available, but they did want a little bit of time to speak at the beginning. And then finally, Lisa Jean Graff, you have some edits to the ordinance to ensure that the ordinance serves people of all abilities. And we'll go through that. So now picking up the ordinance, and is the pastor on? I see Ed Flynn is in, okay, I'm gonna. So we can put Counselor Flynn, who's also joined us, into the, all right. Until the pastor joins us, we're gonna go ahead then to the administration to walk through.
Good morning.
Hi,
everyone.
good. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry,
I was actually
Jennifer.
going to pass on
I
to-
was just going to introduce our star, Jennifer. I'm her hype person. So I'm Chief Selena Barrios Milner, Chief of Equity and Inclusion. Good morning to Councilors Mejia. Thank you for your leadership on this, as well as Councilors Braden, Bach, and Flynn. And thank you, Councilor Edwards, for chairing this session. I'm pleased to open this session today on behalf of the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. As you know, language and communications access, it sits within our cabinet. We're pleased to be here to present on the progress we've made towards making the City of Boston more accessible to persons who speak a language other than English and persons with a disability since we last met in April. Thank you especially to Councilor Mejia for all your work in drafting the amendment. We know that over 100,000 Boston residents speak English less than very well. They self-reported. And our LCA office is determined to make city services accessible to all. And in this way, help carry out our goals of creating a more equitable city. As an immigrant and someone who arrived to this country not speaking English and went through ESL and other programs, this is an issue near and dear to my heart. And it's also an issue of great importance to Mayor Janey. And so we look forward to this discussion and the prompt passage of this ordinance so that we can get towards implementation. So I know that today we're really talking about those details. And I'm going to hand it over to our language access coordinator, Jennifer Vivar Wong, interim director, wrong title, to do an in-depth review of the ordinance. And I just want to, again, lift up her work, throughout the pandemic, dealing with heat emergencies, helping to make sure our engagement is accessible to all. And so thank you, Jennifer, for your hard work, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chief Barrios Milner. I wanted to pass it on to Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. I believe that Pastor Kiki is on, so he might be listed as in the waiting room area situation.
I have Lisa Lamb, Natasha White, and then Jesse Purvis is my policy director. So that's why I was confused, Councilor Mejia.
Okay. All right. So then I just kind of wanted to, as far as all of the suggestions, we're okay with pushing with 9 months.
Okay.
And change the language to reflect best effort language in the timeline translation. We're cool with that. And the Babel notification currently says estimation, so that's taken care of.
Okay.
The document will also include an estimation of when the translation will be made available. And that's what is currently in the document. So I think we're good with that as well. So that's just a few things that we wanted to offer. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. That'll help us as we go further into this. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Thank you for, we know you did the work with the administration behind the scenes. Councilor Flynn, we actually skipped opening remarks. We just got right into this. So, but I wanted for folks to know Councilor Flynn has joined us. So back to Jennifer, and I will keep an eye out for the pastor, but I have a Natasha White, Aletha Lamb, and I don't know if either one of them are connected to the pastor.
Natasha White is a part of our team.
My apologies, Natasha. I am so sorry. And my apologies. So Councilor Mejia, whenever the pastor joins, I will certainly interject. So Jennifer, or did the administration want to walk through the edits that they have?
Yeah, perfect. I just wanted to also acknowledge, I think Lisa, you had your hand raised, and I'm not sure if that just was in partnership with Councilor Mejia's comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we can't hear you. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, Lisa, we are.
So with all due respect, I've informed folks, unless the comment is, Lisa is going to be given the opportunity to go through her edits. So if the comment is about her edits, when I announced this and talked to the administration, would go through it, then I named the pastor, and I also noted that Lisa would also go through her edits as well. And the entire city council had a copy of your edits, Lisa. I still think we have an issue with audio though, Lisa. I can't hear you when you are off mute. So you may want to come on and back off. So, all right, Jennifer, do you want to go through the edits now?
Yeah, so thank you so much. First, I'm happy to be able to be working with all of you again today. This is very important to myself personally, and I know to the office and Mayor Kim Janey. And thank you so much for Councilor Mejia and her team for working with us for the past few months, not only on the language in the ordinance, but with the ultimate goal of codifying this ordinance. I think the three, so if it's okay, I think we'll address the three points that Chief Barrios Milner brought up. And thank you, Councilor Mejia, for giving us updates on those. I know that the first thing that we had discussed was the Babel language. And thank you, Councilor Mejia and your team for clarifying that to us. I think we are all set there and providing an estimated timeline and more context for constituents to know how long usually a certain vital document translation would take. So I appreciate on that. I think we are in agreement there. The next one here that I have is for the language around the release of the English and the document translations, which again, thank you to Councilor Mejia and your team. I think that was updated to reflect the best efforts. So I appreciate that. And then I think the last point that we had here is the timeline of implementation. I appreciate Councilor Mejia and your team for offering 9 months. As someone who does do a lot of the on the ground work, I would really appreciate the reconsideration of 12 months. I do want to emphasize that does not mean that the work is not going to begin or it has stopped, because we have been doing a lot of the work within this ordinance and the past ordinance that has been passed. I just want to be very mindful of the reality of our office and be very honest, because we do want to set realistic expectations for the city and work hard on ensuring that all of these things in this ordinance can be accomplished. So just wanted to highlight that petition for 12 months. However, I think that is kind of the 3 points that we wanted to flag. I did know that we do have to still review some of the language edits from our from legal. And however, I do want to mention that it's more around edits to the language and not any changes to the actual ordinance, which I think we will be following up with the Councilor Mejia's team after this working session as well. So that is, I think, the addressing the 3-4 points that we had from the administration side.
Excellent. And then is the pastor on? So I don't see. Okay. So what I would do now is I'm going to go ahead and have Lisa go through her suggestions and why she's making them. And then I would like for counselors to then engage in a real conversation with everybody about the language, and we can go section by section. Counselor Mejia, does that work for you? I'm sorry, Bethany also, basically I want everybody to have their suggestions and their concerns on the table, and then we'll go section by section with the council as the lead questioners, okay? Counselor Lisa Graff, and my apologies.
That's fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. So most of the suggestions that I had were around a number of areas. One was hoping that there could be ideal meeting access, and hearing this discussion about language translations and best efforts. Maybe some of them need to be framed in that way, because, you know, as much as there's this idealistic idea of how I would like meetings to be set up, it might not be financially or technically possible at this time, but more something to shoot for. And then under focus groups, when I looked at the ordinance, I noticed that there wasn't really a focus on non-speakers or people who are autistic, and it'd be nice to include them in access. And also there's focus on, you know, assisted technology, but there are sometimes when accommodations are not technical, like someone who has a hard time with audio processing would love someone to like write a note to them after a discussion, just to sort of have bullet points so that they can leave a meeting and actually know what was talked about. So like sometimes, you know, tech isn't what's needed, it's just an accommodation. And yeah, I think that's primarily it. I think that covers the majority of the things that I put in.
Yes, I see from the counselors, her Lisa's draft has the her suggested edits in language in green.
Correct.
so that you can follow along. And as we get to the sections, we'll kind of summarize them, but I see it's mostly to include autism, differently abled folks, and the language and accessibility components. I don't know if the administration, have you seen this draft?
I just received it this morning, so I've been trying to read through it right now and as well in the morning.
Okay, and so does the administration have a thought on because I wish we had Commissioner McCosh here, right?
Yeah,
Commissioner McCosh is the head of the Disabilities Commission, who I think she would be excellent at being able to determine if this is the not whether we should do this or not, okay, Lisa, but whether this ordinance is the vehicle to do those things in or not. There might already be an existing ordinance that requires certain accessibility points. There might be, there might not be, but our commissioner on disabilities would be, we'll definitely have to look at this too. I just want to let you know that she's not here.
Yeah, I guess my thought is there are things that are set up now that could have more access. And I would think if there was a legal concern, they would be happening this moment. I think I'm thinking a little bit, maybe idealistically about some of the goals that I have. So
I mean, listen, we're in the middle of also passing a ordinance on digital access. And so it's about access and making our government more accessible. So it could very well be that your suggestions also belong there, especially if we're talking about technology. That's my issue. Is it here or there?
correct.
Okay, that's all. And Commissioner Akash would be helpful to let us all know. So I wanted people to know in terms of transparency. Checking again for the pastor. Okay, so I believe Bethany Lee is here. Bethany, oh great. Bethany is from the Asian Outreach Unit in Greater Boston Legal Services. So Bethany, did you want to walk us through your suggestions, concerns, excitement on behalf of GBLS and your clients?
Yes, Council Mejia asked us to talk specifically also about the vital documents change.
Excellent.
And so just to give a few like real world examples on this, even most recently, we have community-based, well, we usually have community-based intake. Right now, we do our intake all over the phone. And even just last week, we were working with someone who, in trying to make sure she had access to child support, we ended up being the ones having to walk her through the initial application form for the Department of Revenue, right? And so, first to emphasize that I think there's a lot of documents that are not readily accessible to people and that really need to be. I mean, honestly, I was kind of astonished that, in working with one of our interns, we were kind of astonished that this was not translated. Just as a simple document for accessing child support ultimately. But also that even if it is translated, there needs to be so much more that needs to be done in order to actually make it accessible. I just think the more that can be kind of that can be explicit in terms of the access, the better, because it's not necessarily the case that just because it makes it much easier, right? Like, so for example, when we're dealing with benefits applications and trying to get people onto SNAP, it's nice and easy to be able to say, hey, go to the website, go to the top right, you'll see but we have to walk them through step by step. Go to the top right, click that into Chinese, and then you'll be able to walk through the application, and it'll only take about 10 minutes, right? But even then, like, that's what we're telling people and having to kind of walk them through step by step in order to get them to the other language, right? So, to the extent that that can be more explicit and thought about in the process, I think that would be really important. And then just another example in terms of our work in Malden with with requirements of the Voting Rights Act, which actually make in Malden in particular, because it's a 203 jurisdiction, everything that's in English related to voting needs to be translated into Chinese, given the percentage of the population there. And that's important, but two things that jump out at me in terms of making sure everything's translated, or at least in this particular case, the most important documents, right, vital documents, is first that I think this has been raised before, but I think always worth emphasizing again. When we first started looking at the documents that were translated, or even the websites that were translated, much of it was done via Google Translate and just didn't make sense. So making sure to have some sort of quality control for that type of translation is important. And then second, just that ultimately it's not just about the documents, which I think you all know. Ultimately what's resulted from the process that we've engaged in with the mayor in Malden is that they've actually hired a trilingual Mandarin, Cantonese, English speaker in the elections department. And that's what I think will make accessibility real for voters, for Chinese speaking voters in Malden. I'm very excited about the focus in general on language access. So thank you for that. And thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for your leadership and all the work that you guys have done throughout the Commonwealth. But I just want to make sure I understood. So you were okay with the definition of vital documents, or you had some suggestions for it specifically?
I think the more expensive it can be, the better. So I'm okay with it. I think this is a good foundation. I understand the financial constraints. I think if there's some language elsewhere that I think if there are right underneath, I think that I think trying to figure out what that process is for if a document isn't translated but someone needs it, like having that process. Whether it's a person or, something that's very, very clear and beyond clear, actually, I should say. I think even when things are clear, people don't want to jump through that extra hurdle. It feels like it is a barrier, right? It's just like an extra thing. They know it's not accessible to them, so they're not going to bother with it. So some sort of very, very clear process that makes sure even where that document isn't translated, they have access to it.
So almost like a pipeline to translation, or at least which I think the OLCA, Office of Language and Communication Access, will probably be that point that I could tell you once it's up and running, and it is, but I mean, once it's codified and we have additional budgeting, I look forward to being able to tell my constituents, this is a complicated form wherever it came from, whether it's from the city of Boston or from the federal government or, whatever. And here, maybe they can help connect you to an interpreter. Maybe they can help connect you in community access. So I think we, as part of the 1-year annual check-in, which that is also codifying, we'd be working with Jennifer in her office to make sure that we're looking at and reassessing constant pipelines to forms, making sure we got all of the forms, or if there's new forms that are created, or we're creating a new office of participatory budgeting, new forms, how do we pipeline those and make sure that they're translated? So I think we have that commitment completely.
That would be great for them to be like the point. Yeah. Okay.
We've also been joined by Councillor Michael Flaherty. So what we're going to do now, unless the pastor has, I don't know. I don't, Councillor, I don't.
I'll check in with him to see if he's going to be able to join us, but I really do appreciate the constant checking to see if he's there. Thank you.
I want to make sure he feels, he did specifically ask to come in, and I want to make sure that he is, I'll keep checking. So were there other advocates signed up to speak to the language? I think we had Bethany. We had, because if not, we're going to go to the counselors now, and we're going to go section by section, and the counselors kind of leading that conversation with everyone answering. I only have Bethany. Okay. All right. So we have the current red line document. We want to go section by section, forgetting the whereases and going right into the language as introduced. Counselors, if you have on section 1, if you have suggestions or questions, I'm just going to go in order of arrival to Councillor Braden and Councillor Bach, or Councillor Mejia, excuse me, but it's her. I'm assuming she's good with it because she introduced it. So the order of arrival is Councillor Mejia, then it would be Councillor Braden, Councillor Bach, Councillor Flynn, and Councillor Flaherty. So on section 1, which is where our focus is right now, Are there suggestions? Are there questions? Are there?
I just wanted to quickly just say to Lisa's
Absolutely.
point, I think what we can commit to is looking into a more intentional communications access plan in the future that specifically is designed to assist individuals with different levels of abilities. And so, Lisa, we'd like to work with you and other advocates to do just that. And I really do appreciate Councillor Edwards' comments in terms of like all the different potential spaces that it may live, so that it's across different initiatives that we have here on the council. So thank you for that. And then the last piece is we're good with the first section. We just really want to highlight that the last sentence is like a vision statement. And it's crucial that we're focusing this ordinance on the people that it's designed to help. So kind of like just with that in mind. And to Bethany's point, the purpose of our definition of vital documents is that it is broad enough to encompass documents that constituents need to access service and provide information. And so we relied on the US HHS Civil Rights Office for their definition, which we feel is a good place to source as a definition from. And in regards to your point about hiring people who are bilingual or trilingual to serve in departments, we definitely like to see that as perhaps probably in our language access 3.0, but I definitely think that that's moving in the right direction in terms of how we move from there. And I know, Jennifer, earlier you mentioned we were initially advocating for 6 months. You all came back with 12 months, and then we figured if we meet 9 months, that would it's a healthy compromise. So there's still going to be a little bit of push and pull in with that specific bullet, but I think in our best effort, going from 6 months to 12 months is a lot. And so I'm just curious about if we're able to land on a 9 month period, just because I think that would be a good, healthy compromise, and would love to hear from Councillor Edwards in terms of her advice around what, how we can deal with this point of not tension, but just difference.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. And my apologies for I realize section 1 is everything. I should have been more specific. It's section 1 is the whole ordinance, and section 2 is the effective date. So if we were just gonna go ahead and deal with section 2, let's just deal with that right now. That's my problem. I apologize, Councilor Mejia. I was looking at section 1 as on page 2, but so let's just deal with section, that part of the effective date.
I was just trying to from you, Councillor Edwards, in terms of like the initial, our proposal was for 6 months. Jennifer had asked for 12 months, and then we're trying to meet in the middle. So we're proposing 9 months, and I'm just curious if you would have some advice to kind of help us land in a place that is helpful.
And just to include the other councillors in this, I see Councillor Bach has raised her hand. Councillor Braden was here first. So on the issue of effective date, if Councillor Braden, if you have an opinion about that, then we'll go to Councillor Bach, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Braden.
Yeah, I appreciate the urgency, or the sense of urgency in the situation. I feel that I'm inclined to be guided by the folks who feel that what's sort of doable and achievable, and if they feel that it will take 12 months, if it gets done sooner, then that's great. But I think if it takes 12 months, then I'm okay with that. And the other issue, I don't know, are we still talking about the implementation time, or can we go back to the section 1?
We're just going to finish this conversation
Okay.
on the implementation time on section 2. Councillor Bach.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in with a ways and means lens, which would be that it wouldn't be crazy to make full implementation July 1st of next year, only because, so there's a reference in the thing, right, to the idea of sort of like full resources for everything, and that is our budget year. So like, I would certainly expect the administration, whoever it is, to be coming to us in the budget process next year saying this is what we need in order to make this real. And that's obviously the date on which all those resources become available if approved. So that would be my thought, would be rather than necessarily ticking a month number from whichever day we vote passage, actually tying it to the fiscal year.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I would probably, well, I agree with the 12 months. I just want to make sure that when we do something, we do it right. If the administration is seeking 12 months because they think they're able to accomplish this goal in 12 months, you know, I would respect that and support that. Certainly, we would want to do it sooner than that. But if the administration is saying in good faith that it would take 12 months, I'm okay with that, Councilor Edwards. And I have other comments, but I'll hold off. I know we're just speaking on this issue. So thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. And then I think Councilor Flaherty had to step off, but I get the fiscal component. I also think there's ways in which we can have a check-in. Like there's percentages that should be done by certain dates, Councilor Mejia. So to say within 6 months and then prioritize the departments that absolutely need to be ready to roll in 6 months. And those are the ones that are the most front-facing ones. Let's say the vital, like birth certificates and marriage licenses, or you know what I'm trying to say. Like if you were to prioritize for us specific offices that are highly trafficked and highly used by people and say in 6 months, these are the priority, in 9 months, then these ones. And then by the fiscal year, the whole city, maybe that, you know, that would be my suggestion, because I think our concern is that, you know, waiting for, and I know, Jennifer, you're going to say, we're going to be working on it the entire time. It's not like we're holding it back to bam in 12 months, right? I get that. But maybe if that's the by 12 months is when the product is finished, but we prioritize certain departments for your office so that we are moving it along. Does that make sense? Would that be something that's a partnership? So we can,
Yes.
as a council?
Yes, and that's why you are the chair of this committee, because you want to get us to where we need to be. And I love your thinking in terms of adding language that says that we'll work towards this goal for full implementation within the 12 months. And as you know, so yes. And with perhaps we can have something in written agreement of progress reports every quarter, right? And then I do know that at one of our working sessions, when we met, that there was a commitment from the administration that this would be accommodated within this budget cycle. So that's probably what we walked into with that framing. But to, you know, Councilor Box's point, definitely do agree with that as well. So we're here for whatever's going to get us to where we need to be, while also making sure that we're centering the needs of the people that we're fighting for in this conversation. So I think coming to the agreement of saying, you know, full implementation within 12 months is reasonable, and I appreciate us landing here.
Okay, and we can also add in with regular progress reports as part of the language as well. And just acknowledging where we're going along, and just for people's education, it's very normal as part of our weekly meetings for departments to just give a report, and then that becomes part of the official record. We just got a report on short-term rentals, or you know, we can just get reports from the administration. So does that seem realistic, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so we finished section 2, unless any of my colleagues have any other concerns. Now back to the rest of the actual ordinance. Why don't we work on this way? I will call out, we're going to do sections 610.1A, B, C, and that's where we get to our first red line, is in section C. So does anyone have any points on that? I'm looking to my counselors.
What the points.
The only part, as Counselor Bach, were you gonna say something? Okay. There is a red line edit. I believe Counselor Mejia, you agreed to that edit. It's removing departmental plans and recommendations made thereafter. Is that, you agreed to that red line edit?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So,
So Council Edwards, are we still on 610-1A?
yes,
Okay.
go ahead, or A, B, and C. So if
Oh,
you have
okay.
any suggestions in those language parts. Okay. Moving then on to sections, we're just gonna call it 1D, 1E. There's a red line edit again. This is the interpretation and translation requests, and it discussed how the office will respond to them, how they will manage them, that there will be an annual review. The online establishes the online dashboard, and it shall create an online dashboard accessible to people in languages spoken by 5% or 1,000 people, whichever is fewer. So do we want to just go ahead and clarify that language? 1,000 is probably fewer. It's for 1,000, right? Okay, just to make sure that. And is that realistic then? The annual review, the website and languages spoken by people who, if there are 1,000 people, what this is saying is, if there are 1,000 people in the city of Boston who speak a certain language, that language will now be part of languages that forms and things are made available. Is that realistic?
So that is what we have to comply to internally.
Anyway,
all in the-
okay.
yeah.
Perfect. So we'll just take the 5% out. I think that's just we can remove that.
Council
yeah.
Edwards, I just had a quick question. So if more than 1,000 people speak the language, is that?
It will be made available. Yep, it's included. Mhm.
Okay, and how do we know? How do we know the
How
numbers?
many we have?
Yeah, we have. Is that based on the census data, or is it based on another group of information that we're looking at?
I will turn that over to Jennifer. I believe they're monitoring the folks, and that was some of the questions we had. I see Councilor Bach, your hand is up. After Jennifer speaks, I'll call on you.
And if I may very briefly, I spoke to the Chinese Progressive Association about this, and I know they mentioned to me Bethany that at Greater Boston Legal Services and Carolyn at AARW have been very active. So I know both of them are outstanding. So just wanted to highlight the great support Bethany and Carolyn provide, especially for for everybody, but also for the Cantonese speaking community as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I can clarify. So what this means is based on the American Census data, it's 1,000 persons within a marketplace or within the whole city. And what that means is it's persons who have identified as speaking a language other than English and speaking English less than very well. So I do want to clarify there's a difference between 1,000 persons who speak that language, and this data follows persons who speak a different language other than English, but also have identified as speaking English less than very well. And I apologize, that is just a term that is used within the census. Another way to put it, they've identified as needing language access.
But this language doesn't say that, should it? Because this just simply says 1,000 persons that speak a certain language. It doesn't actually say, and also have at least been based off of our census data have said that they do not speak English very well. Because otherwise this to me, just reading it outright, and we have to remember when we write these things, it's not for us presently, it's for people 10 years from now, right? Should we put that language in there?
I do want to make a flag. I think this is going to come, and I apologize to all the council. I think this is going to be a follow-up from the administration because this was something I think that was highlighted by legal. So we can follow up with all of you after this and talk about the language specifically here, just to make sure that it's matching. Yes.
Before we go to Counselor Mejia, I wanted to let Counselor Bach speak, and then Counselor Mejia, if you wanted to respond after Counselor Bach. She's been waiting a little bit.
Would it be helpful? Oh, I'm sorry, it's not my turn.
No, go ahead, Julia. It's fine.
I was just gonna say, would it be helpful to just change to 5%?
That's actually a lot of people then. That might exclude a lot of people. I think what I was going to suggest is we just put in the language that you define it at the office currently right now. So that's very clear about when we're counting numbers, it's people who not only don't speak English, it's that they have acknowledged that they do not speak, like they don't have enough. We're just not looking for people who are also bilingual. Like there are a lot of people who are bilingual and are perfectly fine in English and whatever language, but we can wait for that language. Counselor Bach, sorry.
Yeah, and I was just going to flag that I think as we're thinking about clarifying the 5% and the 1,000, that we should be clear about the difference between like the 610 1H 2C where it gets used, where it's talking about 5% of the neighborhood or 1,000 persons versus the section, the next one down for translation with the department docs, where it's saying every language spoken by 5% of the city of Boston or 1,000 persons. Because on the neighborhood level, you actually want that toggle because a neighborhood might be small enough that more than, 5% is not 1,000, but still like to actually talk to the right people for this project or whatever, like you need to have, so there's 500 Russian speakers, but they need to be like, the things need to be translated in Russian, right? So there it makes sense. Whereas with the city of Boston, it's never going to make sense because 5% of the city of Boston is 35,000 people. So it having the and or like doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, I just wanted to flag that as we're cleaning this up, we have to clean those sections up differently. And then I would just say that, I mean, the translation of all vital docs by departments that second one, that is a very low threshold. So I would love to know from Jennifer, how many languages, once we make the clarification that I agree with Councilor Edwards and Mejia, we should make, right, that we're talking about people who need these docs in the other language, right? As opposed to like, I studied Spanish and, right. But once we do that, like if we actually set a threshold that's any language that's spoken by 1,000 people in the city of Boston, how many languages are we talking about? Because that's a more static number than the neighborhood by neighborhood analysis.
Then so that I'm clear, so that I'm hearing all of this, so let me translate this in my own way. That it should just read 1,000 people who speak languages other than English and speak English less than very well, period, right? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting a definition that basically gets to that goal. Yeah, for this section, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that.
But I think the question to Jennifer was, how many we're talking about? Yeah.
So vital documents, it's the top 10 languages within the city. And the reason why we still use the metric, and again, we'll go back and refine that, is because next year or the years after that, it might not be top 10. It might be that there's 11, or there might be 12, or there might be et cetera, et cetera. So for city vital documents, it's the top 10 right now languages. Would you like me to?
Right now it's the top 10, but Jennifer, what I'm asking is, do you guys have a count of how many languages are like this bar would require you to do if it's 1,000 people? Because my sense is that this bar is quite low, and that there could be 40 languages that 1,000 people in the city of Boston speak. It's a 700,000 person city. So I just want to make sure that we know, sort of what, that we know what the department's signing up for and have a sense of what the magnitude of that is.
Yeah, and I can get you, if it helps, I can get everyone kind of where that data is coming from. So we can kind of see the breakdown as well. We also have a demographic data report that we work alongside with the BPDA, and they analyze the American Census data. So we can get more of that information and send it over after the working session, if that helps.
But so do you have a sense off the top of your head of, for instance, like whatever the 10th most spoken language is, like, or, you know, on that list, like how many people there are?
Yeah, I can tell you them. So for Spanish right now, it's 50,608 persons who have identified as speaking Spanish and also identified as speaking English less than very well. The top 11 spoken language, which is different from written, is Somali, and it's 1,089 persons who have identified as speaking Somali and also speaking English less than very well.
Got it. So from our perspective then, okay, so that's helpful. So right now we do 10, and if this definition were in effect today, the 1,000 person threshold, it might expand us to 11 or 12, it sounds like.
Yes, I do want to make the difference though. What I was reading now is based on the top spoken languages. When it comes to written, I think the difference is because it's 10, it's because of in the top spoken, it's Mandarin and Cantonese. And in the written, we have simplified Chinese.
Right, okay, great, thank you.
I think Counselor Braden had her hand up, Counselor Flynn, and then Counselor Mejia again.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around the percentages. I know that when we sent out our public health information last year at the start of COVID, that none of it was translated into Portuguese. So that was a big problem out here. And we didn't have Russian either. So yeah, and I think there are dramatic differences across neighborhoods. So again, I think that's something we just need to keep an eye on as language groups sort of shift. And then the underlying question is their proficiency, comfortably using English or whatever is sort of a critical piece. Because I do know we have folks who can have limited English, but you know, it's, yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around how this is going to be utilized, you know, for on a neighborhood by neighborhood approach, because one size will not fit all across the different neighborhoods depending on the demographics and language groups. Yeah, I'm not quite clear on how this is going to be operationalized at the neighborhood level.
Is it okay if I respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we also have a breakdown, which I think was also something that was highlighted in the ordinance with Councilor Mejia's team of the neighborhoods. Again, I'm happy to send you all afterwards the neighborhood breakdowns. But for example, and I do want to clarify as well, I know that Councilor Mejia's team also brought up the need for also working with communities and understanding the need there. So LCA has taken steps to kind of work with ONS and get more data on the languages that are spoken within these neighborhoods and the language access need. And we're looking at, again, once we hire a research assistant, also expanding, right? Because as we know, there's a huge amount of data that there's a lot of populations, specifically, undocumented immigrants who may not be reported in the American census. So we are working towards getting to that point where we add to this data. But right now, what I can do, it's not the top 10 languages for all the neighborhoods. It is broken based on the American Census data, and we can send that afterwards if that helps everyone to kind of visualize the breakdown.
That's helpful. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor, I think it was Flynn, then Mejia, then Bach.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I just had a quick comment to Jennifer on the American Census data and in the census data that we recently did. especially during the pandemic, I work closely with the mayor's office. I think we must have had 15 or 20 census drives in Chinatown alone. I just wanted to make sure my residents were counted, especially undocumented residents, neighbors as well. So just in that small little example, what data is more accurate? Is it the census data that the federal government will soon release in August, or is it the American census data? Because I know we did a lot of outreach on the census, the federal census data. So just as a point of clarification, why would you use one and not the other? And would the data that we worked on for the census, federal census, also be included in that?
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Is it okay if I respond? Perfect. If you have, so as I mentioned, we are looking at ways to expand the amount of data that we have to help our breakdown. So if you do have data that you would like to send us over, we are working, I know, as I mentioned, we are working with getting more feedback from ONS liaisons and also expanding that as we move towards getting someone else to fill the research position, looking at other ways to look at other data, include that into the metrics that we have. So if that is something that you would like to share with us, we can definitely take that in. And because we do understand the limitations of data, and we are very aware that you all are doing amazing efforts to get other data that we would love to see and incorporate into it. The reason that we have this is we're just following the Department of Housing and Urban Development guidelines right now.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. If you're requesting ONS to do something in terms of getting some data on a particular neighborhood, could you also send me that same request? I just want to make sure that if ONS is doing something in my neighborhood, I also would want to coordinate with them to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and we're communicating together, we're working together.
Perfect. Right now we're having conversations and then we'll loop you in.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I just say it as it relates to my neighborhood in Chinatown, it also impacts the Bay Village, where we have a large Cantonese speaking community. It impacts downtown Boston, where there's a lot of Cantonese speaking communities as well, and the South End. So I want to make sure that all of my Cantonese speaking residents and Mandarin speaking residents are included. And I'm also glad that I think what you, Jennifer, mentioned, the Somalian community. I have a growing Somalian community in South Boston as well.
Right.
So I want to make sure, obviously, they're counted and they're part of this discussion as well. So thank you for highlighting that, Jennifer.
Thank you. Councillor Bach, did you no longer have a, okay. Councillor.
No, I would just say, Councillor Edwards, I think I'm fine with all the other red lines. I know I'm going to have to drop off in a minute. So I didn't get a chance to say this, so I just wanted to echo everybody's appreciation for the maker and you and the department. I think this is exciting for us to really get up to the sort of like cutting edge standards. It was something I was proud of the Housing Authority for, but felt like they were well ahead of us in the city, and I feel like we're making progress here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Thank you very much. Councillor, again, kind of just trying to rein in the conversation so we can move on to the rest of the ordinance. This is again still on the percentage and any questions about that sections that we just mentioned. So
Councillor Wu's in the waiting room.
Councillor Wu, okay, thank you. All right. So yeah, so we're again on the section dealing with the percentages, the annual review. This section, previous section we discussed establishes the office formally legislative, the office exists, sorry, not to dismiss, but it makes it part of the law so that it can never not exist. And then we go into the percentages of when its services will be used and how, and that's what we're looking at right now. Any more comments on that?
Sorry, Counselor Edward, just wanted to just chime in really quick so that I'm clear, making sure that is, I sometimes need my own interpretation up in here. So basically what we need to say is every time it says 5% or 1,000, we need to ask ourselves if this is citywide or if it applies to a more hyperly local. And if it is citywide, it should just read 1,000 people who speak language other than English and speak English less than very well. But if it's hyper local, it should remain 5% to 1,000. Just want to be, is that cool? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what we're agreeing upon? And then
Yeah.
I appreciated Councilor Braden's point earlier and definitely agree with her on that as well.
Okay, that's our goal. That's where we're headed. I think that we all agree towards what you just said. There's a citywide, and then there's in the neighborhood, and whether the percentages make sense. So, but we will be waiting. I think Jennifer mentioned legal had some edits specifically on that. Okay, so you'll note towards the end of this, there was a red line inserting the language in section 610(1)(e), noting that the dashboard will also contain each department's language access plans in multiple languages, which I think is a red line you agree to, Councilor Mejia. Right. All right, so 610.1G definitions. Let's go to 610H to C. We'll work on this section now. The red line edits or the edits to this includes a definition for vital documents, financial constraints, and then as Councilor Bach, she may have left or she had noted that the 5% in the local neighborhood language, actually in 2C and in the following section of 10.1I as well has the percentage. So we can stay in that world right now, just looking at that language. Again, in the previous conversation, we asked for definition of vital documents. The red line is here. Councilor Mejia, this definition is satisfactory to you?
Yes.
Okay. And then Councilor, in the financial constraints, if I understand that, it's just to make sure that while we legally are going to make this a requirement, we need to balance it with the practical realities, Jennifer. Is that what we're doing with this? Noting that in case there's a health emergency or an economic recession, there might be a time where they don't have every single language at every single moment and every, like, to the full capacity. Is that what this does? Okay. All right, those are my questions. We'll go in order of arrival. Councilor, since these are red lines you've seen, Councilor Mejia, I'm going to go ahead and go to Councilor Braden, then Councilor Bach, then Councilor Flynn. Okay, Councilor Bach.
Yeah, no, I think like I said, I think I'm fine with all the red lines.
Okay, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. So I know there was several paragraphs there. I was just trying to keep up with everything. So the one issue I had on section 610(1)H2C, so all communication regarding the meeting, including posts at the Boston Public Notice Board in the meeting's language access and disability accommodations, will have a contact phone number and email to the OLCA, as well as sponsoring, the point of contact. So my concern is when, and I think that's good, we have that information. My concern is when someone does request assistance, how do we ensure that there's actually someone from the city of Boston that speaks Cantonese, that speaks Mandarin, that speaks Somalian, that speaks Spanish, that is available and that is accessible. And that's going to be at the meeting, and we're going to coordinate schedules and coordinate times. I had a hard time, I'll be honest with you, last year, 18 months ago with BPDA on this issue. And I insisted to BPDA to change their policy on a lot of, on working in the Chinatown community. And I insisted that they must have Cantonese and Mandarin speakers in Chinatown when they have meetings there. But walk me through can someone walk me through the logistics of who's available in city government to provide translation services? Do we have enough translators, interpreters in city government?
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I can answer that. So when it comes to interpretation at meetings, while we do have an array of multilingual staff, I guess I'll start with some of the first questions. I'm happy to follow up with the BPDA with any concerns that you have and talk to their language access coordinator separately about the issues. I apologize. But with answering these notices. So what we have in the city is the city's language line. So it's an over the phone interpretation. While there are multilingual staff within every department, and we do have that list, and in our trainings, we do advise the first connection for any kind of on-demand interpretation, which means any unexpected situation where someone needs language access, whether that be a walk-in or a call. We do advise folks to connect to see if there's someone in their office who can provide that in-person, in-language communication. However, if it is a call over the phone, what we do advise is that they connect to the language line and get an interpreter that way to get the request from the constituents. If someone does request an interpretation for, let's say, a public meeting, we then do leverage vendors and interpreters, which is from all different. So we have companies, small businesses. We work with community-based organizations as well, who can, and independent freelancers who can provide interpretation for meetings. So hopefully that kind of clears up the process. So when there's an on-demand interpretation need, we do have resources such as multilingual staff who can provide in-language, in-person communication. We have the language line. We have also VRI. So if someone does walk in and they do need ASL, we have VRI available services, which we selected in partnership with MCDHH. Sorry, my apologies. Disability Commission. And then the process for actually getting an interpreter there, we wouldn't use multilingual staff. We would use interpreters from the array of vendors, and I'm happy to send our public vendor list that is on our webpage to everyone as well.
Well, that information, Jennifer, was very helpful. Thank you for providing that. And the reason I asked that is I just want to make sure, like all my district councilors, that our voices, our constituents' voices are being heard. Just one small example. I have 5 people on my staff, and 4 of them are a woman of color, and they're all immigrants. And I specifically look for people that could speak languages other than English, so that they can communicate with my constituents. And so we're able to have people on my staff that speak Cantonese, Mandarin, Spanish, and another language that escapes me right now. But so this is a critical issue. I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards, to Councilor Mejia, and to your team as well, Jennifer, and the advocates. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for pipelining other organizations, the Boston's Interpretive Collective. There are a lot of independent freelancers, as Jennifer mentioned, that's going to help us with some of our city contracting and diversity outreach in a huge way, which we know we need to improve a great deal. So unless there's any other questions about these sections, I see Councilor Braden just raised your hand and Councilor Mejia has her hand up. You want to speak to these sections with these red lines. Councilor Braden?
I had a specific comment more than a question about a lot of our meetings are to do with development, and sometimes the topic, the subject matter is rather technical. And we have had some feedback that sometimes the interpretation leaves a little to be desired. It's not, so, I think when you're talking about some technical material, it's very similar probably to medical translation, that, ensuring that there's a level of proficiency with the material at the level of the translator, that they're able to adequately translate the material in the context of a development meeting or whatever, so that the folks who do not speak English are managing to be informed. It's just a comment, and again, we're really starting to insist on more translation recently, and I think just making sure that the technical material is made accessible to people is really important. I think that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baden. Councillor Mejia?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we have our plain language clause and cultural competent clause there. To Councillor Braden's point, that's something that is designed to ensure that people are not just, it's not just about translation, but that original speakers are speaking in ways that it's meant to be. So I just want to kind of underscore the importance of that. And we saw with flattening the curve and social distancing, what that was like even for native English speakers, right? And so just really being super mindful around that. So I think dead on with that, and agree, just making sure that we have that plain language and cultural competent clause in the document.
Excellent. So moving on to, so we just went up to section 610.1/I. This is dealing with translation and requirements of when, I guess, it will kick in, and the translation guidelines. So we'll deal with section I and section, actually, let's just deal with section I. It's pretty big, and there's that's where the remaining red lines are. So let's just deal with that. So and Councillor Wu, I don't, sorry if I failed to recognize that you were here. Did you have any questions about any of the other parts? I'm sorry if I
no problem at all.
Okay.
I'll pipe up when I do, but I'm good and just wanted to be here to support.
Okay. And as one last time, call for the pastor. I don't see him. So, but I am looking. All right. So section I deals with the guidelines, excuse me, the translation and what we're supposed to do. Again, we have the 5% and the 1,000 persons for vital documents to be translated in language spoken by 5% of the population of the city, or by 1,000 persons, whichever is fewer. I think that we're going to use the language, or at least wait till legal to come back with defining what that 1,000 is. Okay. Departmental translation guidelines. The red lines start if a city department is unable to translate in accordance with the preceding paragraph due to lack of funding, the department shall make arrangements with OLCA to contract. Then the red line: if financial constraints impede the city's ability to have a document translated, it will put in its place a Babel notice with information on how to get the document translated, made available in the most commonly used languages. The document will also include an estimation of when the translation will be made available. This is a red line, I believe, Councillor Mihu, you agreed to, and it's consistent with the financial constraint. Yeah, perfect. Okay, and again, just let me go through the red lines, and we can go to the councillors. In section 610.1I2D, it discusses the timeline of translation for documents and information. And that's where the best effort possible language is put in. So it reads, any information that is deemed necessary to translate into the most commonly used languages shall be released at the same time that the information is released in English to the best effort possible. And then finally, the section in the section 6 is removed or adjusted for the text-to-speech requirement. And instead it states city departments will strive to provide information, vital documents, and city web pages in a way that accommodates individuals who cannot read or write in any language based upon the recommendations of a literacy task force. So go in order of arrival again, Councilor Mejia, and Councilor Braden, Councilor Bach, then Councilor Flynn, and Councilor Wu.
I'm fine with all of those.
Okay, Councilor Braden.
I'm fine with those as well. Thank you.
Councilor
Keep my
Bach.
hand on.
Yep, all good.
Okay. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, I just wanted to highlight one issue on letter A, small a. If a city department is unable to translate a document in accordance with the preceding paragraph due to lack of funding, so, you know, then steps will be taken. So I'm glad steps will be taken. But there really should be no circumstances, in my opinion, where the city of Boston doesn't have funding. If that's the case, if we're thinking about not having funding, and my friend and colleague is here is Councilor Bork, are we able to use federal funds that the federal government has recently given the city to make sure that this problem doesn't arise, where we're able to make sure language and communication access at the city of Boston has the necessary funding to accomplish all their goals and tasks?
And before you go, Councilor Bach, Councilor Flynn, as you'll recall when we were discussing this, that's why the definition of financial constraints came in, because we didn't want it to be every single department kind of, well, we do, we don't, we can, we can't, it's expensive, it's not kind of analysis. And so we put in I think a pretty good definition of financial constraints where this would be the exception, which financial constraints refers to circumstances which impede the full and optimal level of allocated funding being utilized by a specific department. Circumstances may include, but are not limited to, public health emergencies or economic recessions. So, I'll turn it over to Councilor Bach to answer any other available funding for you, Councilor Flynn.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would say is that, as we know, the federal money, although it's substantial, is one-time funding. And that's a big part of the reason we've been talking about things like the, you know, capital investments that we really need. Like, I know you've talked a lot about the schools, Councilor Flynn, on that front. So I think that the federal funding could be really useful if, for example, in this moment of instituting this, in that 12 months that Jennifer has to implement it, there's just a huge cache of documents that need to be translated up front, right? And to your point, Councilor Flynn, to make sure that kind of we get over that hump without just saying, oh, we've got a delay here. It could be really useful. But I think it's important for us as councilors who want to see the city really committed in a thoroughgoing way to language access to make sure that we're scaling up that support in our operating budget, right? So that it's reliably there regardless of sort of federal windfalls. And I think it's a good, that financial constraints definition, to me, to Councilor Edwards' point, is really saying, like, you're only going to use that when there's something extreme that happens, right? Not as a kind of like, oh, there's not enough money, like every year sort of a thing, because that's more of a habitual thing versus something like an emergency or a major recession. So yeah, that would be, but that would be my take, Councilor Flynn, is that certainly it could be in the mix of things we were using federal funds for if there's kind of a big tranche of documents that Jennifer needs more resources to get translated right at the start, but we wouldn't want to build on that permanently.
Well, thank you, Councilor Bach, and appreciate the response and the answer. And I think also it's a responsibility of us city councilors also to advocate during budget season, to effectively advocate for the Office of Language and Communication Access, and to be more involved and more engaged in making sure that they have the resources that they need to effectively do their job. So thank you, Councilor Bach, and thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Councilor Wu, any thoughts?
Nope, I'm good. And just want to note that I'm very sorry I have to jump off, but I will review the final recommendations, and really grateful to everyone for moving this forward and making sure we are staying modern and the most up to date with recognizing accessibility and its centrality to our residents. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. So in terms of the, I just had one question to the maker. In this, we have a literacy task force noted. Is that defined anywhere? Are we, I mean, I guess I want to make sure at the last sentence is on where we get rid of text to speech, but we say city departments will strive to provide information, vital documents, and city web pages in a way that accommodates individuals who cannot read or write in any language based upon the recommendations of a literacy task force. Are we establishing that task force with this ordinance? Is it someplace else? Do we need to define it?
It's not defined, Councilor Edwards, but we can define it. And I think basically we currently have filed the literacy task force ordinance separately from the recommendation that was made in previous working sessions.
Okay, so I guess I just don't want to leave this hanging. So not saying that I don't get things done, but if we don't get to the literacy task force, if that doesn't get, would you be okay with some language suggestions from me saying a literacy task force to be established formally or informally, interdepartment, some sort of kind of language so that we.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yep. I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I agree. You don't want to leave a loose end, like a reference that refers to nothing in. So I think that the current capitalization implies it's a thing that it exists. So I think to Councilor Edwards' point, there's probably a way to make it so that once it does exist, it's referring to that. But when it doesn't exist, it refers to the need to at least pull some people together and talk about something. So.
Okay, like literacy task force to be established by ordinance or through within 6 or 8 months, interdepartment and advocates, something like that. Okay, just want to make sure we didn't we didn't start and not. Okay, so now moving on to section 610 1J, customer service, J12, 610 L1K. That's also record keeping. 610-1M, compliance. N, which is available funding. And O, which is conflict with other language access guidelines. So that would then conclude the rest of the ordinance. So if we were going to stick with those, J, K, L, M, N, O. Go in order of arrival. I think this is all original language. There's no red lines in here. So Councilor Mejia, since this is your original language, I'm assuming you're fine with this. Councilor, okay. And Councilor Braden may have had to step off. So Councilor Bach?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, maybe on number 7, OLCA shall hold a listening forum at least once a year. Conduct outreach to community groups, general public. Listening forum shall be offered. So I support all of that. I think that's excellent. Just want to know who would call the meeting? Would it be OLCA? How would they do it? Just some of the logistics of it, and how would they engage the community? How would we engage our immigrant neighbors? And maybe just a little bit of the outreach process, just so that I just want to make sure that our constituents, my constituents, and certainly my district city council colleagues as well, their constituents are able to participate.
I don't know, Jennifer, if you had any suggestions. I think this language is intentionally broad to give OLCA that opportunity to come to us with suggestions on how they're going to do the outreach. I know their number one priority is going to be getting all the departments just to respond. That's going to be their first outreach. But since it's going to be once a year, we won't have that listening session for some time too. So I don't know, Jennifer, if you had any suggestions, and maybe talk about some of the work you're already doing in terms of outreach and how you access communities.
Yeah, so what we've done, because we've been mostly internally facing and we've been transitioning now, well, from when we were a program and transitioning out into a department, what we started back during the pandemic is we started kind of doing to build trust and relationship with community-based organizations. We have a list of community-based organizations in ethnic media, and we've been proactively throughout the past few months meeting with each of them individually, which is still going to take a few more months on our end, but it's been helping us kind of get that connection with community-based organizations. For this, I do want to clarify, it might require maybe more than one listening sessions, because as it's listed right now, the most commonly used languages within the city would be the top 10 languages. And I foresee to make space and time for everyone who would like to provide feedback in their language and also have that feedback be interpreted back into English during those sessions. We may have to break those up to a couple of feedback sessions, but I'm happy to kind of think more thoroughly through all of this with all of you. And of course, leveraging the amazing departments within the city, working with them, getting outreach done. And I do want to emphasize there's other feedback mechanisms within this policy itself, which will also be available for constituents. I know that it mentions a survey that is also in the top 10 languages. We are currently working on that. We have one already in our page that is translated on the public website, but we are revamping it and retranslating, and we'll also make that available as a way to provide feedback. Even though it may not be instead of waiting until the once a year. And then also there will be other mechanisms in place to provide complaints, feedback, compliments as well for constituents, and be able for us to address them, which I think we also discussed in previous working sessions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Maybe my suggestion, Councilor Edwards, if it's appropriate, is when OLCA has their listening session or outreach, would it be appropriate to recommend maybe OLCA working with district councilors and ONS, conduct these listening sessions or feedback sessions? I think it would be good to get the district councilors, engaged in working with your office in a formal structured way. Just a suggestion.
Agreed. And also with all due respect and love to our at-large city councilor, who is the lead sponsor, who is, been pushing this too. I think maybe collectively commitment to work with all city councilors, but obviously she's outnumbered here with all the district city councilors. But I think there's no doubt there's a commitment from the administration to work with all of us to make this work. Every single one of us wants this to be the most robust, accessible, vibrant legislation, so that no one feels that their government can't listen to them and that they don't feel left out. So, Councilor Mejia, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I do appreciate how hard Councilor Flynn always goes for his district, and I do appreciate Councilor Edwards, your comments around including all of us. I think that that's the only way we're really going to move the needle on all things that the city needs to do. But I would just say that perhaps it's maybe once a year, and it's around some of the most commonly used languages that we could do that review, if that is helpful. Yeah, that's basically it. Never mind about, you already provided the language, but 100% agree with you with that.
Okay, thank you. I have two quick questions. Again, to Julia, or Councilor Mejia, excuse me, the definitions that I wonder if makes sense. Looking at number M2 with compliance, it talks about constituent facing departments. Do we want to define those? Am I on mute? Hello? Can people hear me? Okay, so as you'll see, the constituent, okay.
Sorry, I was talking and I was on mute. Yes, we should do that.
Okay, I'm happy to do that definition. And then I think in N, we're gonna do the whole part. I wonder if we should in N, we say financial, so the sentence reads, notwithstanding the provisions of this ordinance, if a city department determines that meeting the foregoing requirements in whole or in part is not possible due to fiscal limitations or costs, I would just suggest we stay consistent with the language we used and define and put in, what is it, the financial constraints instead of fiscal limitations, just to be consistent since we defined it.
Agreed.
Okay. Okay. I know it also says a phased approach shall be provided to the OLCA, and the department shall work with that office to implement its departmental plan. I'm interpreting a phased approach to be, do we want it on a timeline? Do we want it to be a little bit more specific? Or we're just assuming this is, how do you want this phased approach and timeline to be done when a department is basically saying they can't do it? They're supposed to come back with something to say how they're going to get it done. Maybe I'm too deep in the weeds.
What is feasible, Jennifer? I guess it would be
Yeah,
helpful.
that's a great question.
Let's just start off with, I think, a phased approach. But I would love to hear your thoughts in terms of what would make the most sense. And what would be the most helpful.
And if the language as is, Jennifer, is enough of a runway for you,
Yeah.
then that's also fine. You may not want to define it quite yet, but I just wanted to know. Okay.
Maybe what about the fiscal year? Maybe it could be something around the fiscal year and kind of have that type of approach to this. What are your thoughts? What would be helpful?
Yeah, I think to be on, I think to be very transparent, I think it's going to depend on also how we also define. I know that you also mentioned about having set months where certain things have to be completed so that we can, stay in progress and quarterly reports. So I think depending on where we end up with that conversation and where that's finalized, I think that will give more context as to how we can approach. But I think the language there is okay for our end.
Okay. All right, so we have, I think we've gone through the entire ordinance. What we can do is, we're really waiting last minute, or not last minute, but lastly for the suggested legal language on population definition and what they, making it consistent, and whatever legal, legal department may have some suggestions. So when we get those back, I'm sure Council Mejia will assess them. And if it makes sense to do either another working session with their suggestions, or there might be no problem with their suggestions. And we would still need to then present an amended version to the public for a vote. But so what we're really waiting on now is the legal department. But I understand that we have come to an agreement on several components. The last part was the phased in, I'm sorry, not the phased in, the timeline, which I still don't know where that landed. Were we gonna have the certain percentages done by 9 months? Were we gonna have certain departments done by a certain time? We landed it ultimately on the fiscal year, right? This is the
So
effective date.
No, we can finish that, and then I do have some comments that I want to make in regards to having another working session, because I believe, does it seem like we're going to have another working session based on the law department's recommendation? Because we are most likely going to be looking favorably upon those recommendations, as we know some of these things will be technical. And so I'm just curious in terms of timeline, will we be able to bring this up for a vote in our next city council meeting? That's what we're like.
Got you. No, I don't want this to be delayed either, or with just more conversation. If at the end of the day, the suggestions from the legal department come and are consistent with the goals, mission, and are really helping to just define, then I think that's it's different when we're cleaning up versus like changing the entire thing. Yeah. So I agree with you, Councilor Mejia. There's a sense of urgency to get this done and to get it done legally accurate. And so we'll again ask the legal department for their suggested language or any memos. And I assume if you are okay with them, then okay. So I'll look to you. And then in terms of Lisa, we will take your suggestions to the commissioner. And again, like I said, we have a digital access ordinance that we are going to get done. And we have other ordinances as well, where your suggestions either could be added to them or become their own separate one. I don't know that it belongs in the language access one, but that I could be wrong. So Commissioner McCosh will look at this language to make sure. But your edits are incredible. I want to acknowledge that. Thank you. And so with that, my colleagues, unless we're going to continue to update our committee report, and we will be waiting on the legal department, but I think we've come to consensus on the entirety of it. Okay, thank you so much.
I was just saying thank you, everyone.
Oh, great, thank you. So thank you, everyone. Good working session. We will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.